Okay, so now that we finished attaching our motor cartridge to the prop adapter and the propeller, and we've secured this to our 6-inch PVC lengths with our Templex tape and our 1.5" U-clamp, we're going to wire these motors to our tether. So for this, we're going to need a few things. We're going to need our tether itself. We're going to need the wires on the back of our motors here. Then we're also going to need some electrical tape. We're going to need 2 small zip ties. And then we are also going to need a pair of wire cutters. And we're also going to need a pair of wire strippers, which are both present on this multi-tool here. So the next step after we've completed building our motors is to connect the actual motor cartridge itself to the individual pair of wires to the tether. So there are 3 pairs of wires built into a tether. Here's the first pair, second pair, and third pair. And then there are 3 motors. So each motor with 2 wires will connect to a pair of wires in the tether. So I've connected the first motor here to give you guys an example of what this next step will entail. So not too difficult to see right there. And so the first thing that we're going to do is know that it does not matter which motor goes to a specific part on the tether. Each motor doesn't have a designated wire that's marked somehow that it needs to be attached to. That's not really kind of important here. All that matters is that each motor is wired to one tether. We don't want to use one wire from this pair on this motor and then the second wire from this pair. We want to make sure that each individual pair goes to its own motor. So we're going to need our strippers here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the rubber band from our new motor. New motors come packaged like this. And then we're going to unravel our wires here. And you'll notice that there's a brown wire and a black wire, and that they are not connected in any way until they get to the actual motor cartridge. So they're completely separate from each other. And then what you'll also notice, if you take a look at the speaker wire, you'll notice that there are 2 different wires in the pair. This one right here, which has no white stripe, unlike this wire without a stripe is called the blank wire. The wire with a stripe is called the striped wire. When we wire our tether to our motor, the blank wire will always connect to the brown wire. The striped wire will always connect to the black wire. So you can see here on this one, the unmarked wire has been connected to the brown wire, and the striped wire has been connected to the black wire. So the first thing we're going to do is connect our striped wire. So make sure that you kind of pull apart these 2 wires here just a little bit. You want to have some room to work with, but we don't want it too separated. And then we'll just leave our other wire alone for right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our strippers, and then you'll notice on these separate holes that there are numbers all across them on the left side and on the right side. When we strip our wires, we're going to make sure to use the size 14/16 on the motor wires, so the brown and black wires that come out of our motor. They will use size 14/16. And then when we strip our speaker wires, we will be sure to use the size 12/14, which is a slightly larger hole. If we don't use these specific sizes, we either will not be unable to strip the actual wires, or we will take extra wire with the actual lining of the wire when we strip it off. So it's important to recognize that difference between the two. So we want to use the size 14/16 for motor wires and size 12/14 for speaker wire. So we're going to connect the blank part of our wire to the brown wire of the motor. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start with a unstripped wire. So here we have our blank wire, the wire without a stripe. And we're going to find the hole size 12/14. Then we're going to give roughly about between 3/4 of an inch and an inch of space between the edge of the wire and where we clamp down with our strippers here. So I've left about 3/4 of an inch here, making sure that I'm holding the strippers firmly in one hand, and then I'm going to hold the wire in my second hand. Now I'm not going to push away with my thumb, or I'm not either going to bend the wire when I pull away either. I'm going to push directly away from myself. This way we don't take any excess wire with it. And once we've removed the lining, we're going to tighten the wires. Going to make sure that there are none that are separated or frayed. And now we have the first part of the wiring complete. Now we're going to repeat this same process for our brown wire. So we're going to do the same thing. The brown and black wires come partially stripped. But what we're going to do is we're going to take about another 1/2 inch of our lining off. So we're going to use size 14/16 since this is a motor wire. So we have roughly about the same amount of wire that will be exposed as on our speaker wire. And so we're going to repeat this by holding our wire in one hand, and we're going to push away from ourselves with the other hand. And it might be a little bit more difficult because these brown and black wires are a bit tougher to work with, and they're a bit stiffer themselves. And the wires generally stay coiled and tightly wound, unlike the speaker wire. Alright, so now that I've stripped the end off of the brown wire, and I've also stripped the end off of our unmarked wire, alright, there's no stripe, I'm going to make a cross here, alright, I'm going to make this sort of X symbol, alright, I'm going to hold the two wires together at the center of that cross section, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to twist the wires together. Now, I'm not twisting one wire around the other, alright, but I'm twisting them around each other equally, alright, and by making this cross, it makes it much easier to do this, alright, so you can see as I go up, alright, there's still part of that cross, it's just moved farther along, alright, I'm still twisting the two and coiling them around each other, and then when you get to the end, you should have a connection that looks similar to this, with intervals of the speaker wire and the motor wire all the way up. Alright, so once you do this, I'm going to take a moment to strip with my size 12/14 wire strippers, the same length from our marked wire. And I'm going to also do the same thing with the size 14/16 wire strippers for the black wire. And I'm going to make this same connection here again. Okay, so now I've stripped both my marked or striped wire. Alright, so here's the white stripe on the wire. And I've also stripped the black wire here. I'm going to connect the black wire to the striped wire in the exact same manner as I did with the brown and unmarked wire. Alright, so I'm going to make that cross. Alright, I'm going to hold the two together, making that cross. And I'm going to make sure that the two wires are coiling around each other. And you can tell if they're doing that if you see an interval all the way up along this wire connection of speaker wire, motor wire, speaker wire, motor wire. It should be a combination of gray and kind of a copper colored wire. Alright, so now I have my two connections, and I'm going to use the electrical tape to secure them. Okay, so before I use my electrical tape, I'm going to make sure that the two wires coming from the same motor, alright, two wires coming from the same motor, are connected to the same speaker wire pair. Alright, so same pair going to the same motor. Alright, so once I've made sure that I'm not mixing and matching the wires from different wire pairs, I'm going to take the first connection that I made. So here I have my brown wire and my unmarked wire. I'm going to kind of fold down the connection against the speaker wire. Alright, it's going to kind of hang like that, kind of midway. Alright, I'm going to hold it there, and I'm going to take a few inches of the electrical tape. That should do. Alright, I'm going to secure the first sort of level of electrical tape. So this entails just connecting the two wires together with my tape. So I'm going to put it directly over where the two insulation pieces of the wire meet. Alright, so right where the speaker wire meets the brown wire. Alright, I'm going to put it right there. And then I'm going to tightly wrap all the way around. I'm going to go up the length, and I'm going to cover all of the exposed wire with my electrical tape here. Alright, I'm going to make sure that it's nice and tight and that there's no open gaps. And then I'm going to go back and I go down the other way onto the brown wire. Alright, now I'm going to do the same thing for the black wire and the marked wire. So to do this, I'm going to fold down the connection right there. I'm going to fold it down just like that, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to put the tape starting directly between the speaker wire and our motor wire. I'm going to wrap up to cover the rest of this exposed wire, then I go down and then finish right around here on the motor wire. Alright, so now that I've made my individual connections with the electrical tape that I have, alright, I've secured with electrical tape the unmarked and the brown wire, and then I've also done the striped and the black motor wire. I'm going to do the exact same thing for my remaining two motors and the remaining two wire pairs from our tether. So now that we've made 6 individual connections connecting and wiring our motors to the actual tether itself, we are going to wrap each individual pair with electrical tape. So once we've made sure that the actual wires themselves are properly wired, that each blank connects to a brown, and that each striped or marked wire connects to a black wire, we're going to wrap each individual pair with the electrical tape. So the reason we do this is, 1, it makes it easier for when we do the final wrap of our tether, but 2, it adds just another layer of security and waterproofing. So when we do this, we want to start with a pair. We don't want to wire 2 wires from different pairs. So you want to wrap an individual pair. So here's a pair and here's a pair. They come from the same double speaker wire, and they come from the same motor. And what we're going to do is we're going to start roughly about a 1/2 inch or to an inch on either side of the individual connections here. So I'm going to take a roll of electrical tape, and I'm not sure how much I'm going to need, so I'm not going to take a set amount off like I did for these individual connections. I'm just going to start wrapping here at the top, or at the bottom, since this is the speaker wire. And the goal is to have no gaps or open spaces in this. We want a very tight and neatly wound wrap around the pair here. So as I go, it's going to get more difficult once I get up to the thicker parts of the connection. But as I go, I'm going to make sure that I'm tightly winding and tightly coiling and leaving no gaps. So if I've left a gap, as I've done here, there's a small gap right there. I'm not going to worry. I'm just going to come back around, being sure that there are no open spaces as I'm doing this. I'm going to go back, and I'm tightly pressing each wrap and that I do to the underside or the back side of the wire. So it's not loosely hanging back there. There are no holes like this exposed. I'm making sure to push each one down, and I'm making sure to go back over each edge so that I get rid of that. And then I'm just going to go to the other side of the connection and complete my wrap towards the bottom. Now it might be difficult as you try going to the left side or to the right side if you started on the left and going to the right, as the amount of wire or connection that you are actually wrapping decreases. So you might have a very lumpy or a very tightly wound wrap here on the very end, but you just want to make sure that you go back over it, make sure you cover any gaps that you missed. And once you've done that, you're going to pull your connection off. You're going to pull the rest of your electrical tape off, and now we have our double or our pair tightly wound like we have here, and now I'm going to do the same thing for the third and final pair. Now that we've finished wrapping the individual pairs that connect the tether to the motor, we're going to wrap these 3 pairs together into one large tether. To do this, we're going to need a lot of electrical tape. So I'm not planning on using this entire roll because that would be ridiculous, but I do need a substantial amount, and I'm not going to cut off a certain amount or give a certain numerical value of a distance of electrical tape that should be used. Each individual or each different wrap is going to have its own unique parts to it. So you may need to go around twice, you may need to go around once, you may need to cut it at one point and re-wrap at another. So it's really at the discretion of the maker of the actual Aquabot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that these 3 individual pairs of wires are laid out just about like that. I'm going to take my electrical tape. I'm going to start wrapping a little bit farther back than I did with the other wrap here. And so I'm going to start wrapping, and I'm going to make sure to follow the same guidelines I did for the pair wrappings. So I want to make sure that the electrical tape is not really showing or leaving any gaps or leaving any exposed places where water can get in. The goal of this is to waterproof and make the connections water resistant to avoid corrosion. So now as I start going over the actual wiring, I like to do one wrap around. So I like to just make sure that I'm covering all the space, but I don't really hold myself to a really good standard of wrapping. So I'm going to go around once, and I'm not going to break this wrap either. So, I'm clearly leaving some large gaps and some very rough wrapping here. So I'm going to just go around like this. And then I'm going to come back at the very end. I'm going to come back as soon as I get to about here and make sure to really tightly wind and wrap the electrical tape around these connections and make sure to get every single hole and little crevice that's exposed that I possibly can. I don't want any water getting in here, and if there is water that gets in here, the entire tether, this entire 30-foot tether, has to be thrown away and all the wiring inside the box redone, as well as all the connections to the actual motors. So 1 or 2 on occasion might occur, but definitely you do want to avoid any occasion where you have 10, 15, or even 20 Aquabotz that require new tethers, and you'll spend an entire week trying to repair them. So now I'm going back, and I'm making sure to firmly apply the electrical tape to whatever surface that it touches. I don't want any loose tape or any loose ends. So like right here I have a very small amount of space exposed. I'm going to make sure that I tightly press it to the surface. I don't want any water getting in there. This large little bend or bulge right here in the wiring is always the most difficult part to wrap, because no matter what you do, there's almost always going to either be a very large crease or a very large hole exposed as you go around. So that's why you want to make sure that you're actually paying attention as you do this. You don't want any gaps being missed, or you don't want to make any mistakes that you have to pay for later. So I'm going to go down, and I'm making sure to try and avoid as best I can any lumpiness in the wiring. There's going to be a little bit here that I got to get rid of. So I'll go back around with another wrap. There we go. And then I'm just going to go back to the other side, being sure that I have a proper connected tether without any holes or any gaps that need to be filled. Alright, so now that I've done that, I'm going to snap off the electrical tape, going to firmly place down, and now I'm going to get my 2 small zip ties. Alright, I'm going to place one on each end right on the edge of where we put our electrical tape. Now the reason we use these small zip ties, I will show you actually in a minute when I put them on. So the first thing we're going to do when we put it on is we're going to find the edge of where we just finished our wrap. So I'm going to find the exposed edge of our electrical tape, and I'm going to tighten the zip tie around it there. That way it kind of acts as a, it like locks the electrical tape in place. That way it doesn't end up unraveling on us. Alright, so there we go. I'm going to put that one there. I'm going to do the same thing on this side. I'm just going to put the zip tie on the opposite end, on the lower end of our connection here of our tether. I'm going to, if I can slide it through, there we go. Alright, I'm going to tighten it, and you're going to want to make sure that at the very least you do this beyond where the connection is made. This is because as you might end up having to pull your motors or your Aquabot out of the water. Say for instance your Aquabot stops working and you need to pull it up by the tether. You don't want to have any of these connections come loose in the process from tension pulling on the connections. So what these zip ties do is the zip ties halt the force of the tension on the connections here. That way you don't inadvertently end up snapping two wires undone from each other. Alright? So that's the purpose for our use of these two small zip ties. And then I'm going to take the wire cutters, and just like if you've watched in the segment with making our tether, we're going to snip off the excess zip tie. Alright, so I'm going to get as close as I can to the connection. I'm going to snip off the excess plastic there, and then I'm going to do the same thing for this side. And now we've finished wiring our motors to our tether.